Welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast. This is where we help you engage more learners more effectively. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Cottam, and today I'm joined by my friend, Michelle Patterson. She is a leader in universal design for learning. And in this episode, we explore what UDL really means and how shifting from average learner thinking to diverse thinking changes everything. And she gives us some practical ways to design learning that works for more students from the start. Let's get into the conversation. Today on the podcast, we have Michelle Patterson with us. She's a leader whose work centers on designing learning environments where all learners can thrive. She's currently a doctoral candidate with professional roots in K-12 special education and assistive technology. I was so excited to meet Michelle at the OLC conference in fall of 2025, I believe. And we had such an awesome conversation that I really wanted to have her on the podcast to share her ideas around universal design and what she's been learning with the audience here. So, Michelle, welcome. I am so glad we finally get to have you on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for having me here on the podcast. I am a huge fan of the podcast and the work that you've done around Agile and higher ed. As for me, most currently, I'm working as a facilitator, guiding faculty from K-12 and higher education to learn about implementing universal design for learning.
So, what is universal design?
Well, I'm glad you asked. And so whether somebody's new to UDL or even more so, if you've learned about UDL in the past, it's a great chance to see UDL through a new set of eyes. UDL focuses on the idea of learner variability, that there is no average student. And I think for a lot of us, when we design, we think about designing for the average student.
Right.
But with UDL, we think about the range of students rather than the average student. And learner variability really kind of gives us this grounding foundation to think about when we design, we're not designing one size fits all, because one size fits all works for no one. We're designing for the range of learners. And that segues into what are the barriers that exist in design. So when I'm designing a course and I start thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I taught this last semester and students struggled with this and, they didn't do this. They turned in everything late and they didn't do well on assessments. In the past, I could have framed that in my mind as, well, those are the kids who went through COVID or this problem or, those are students who get accommodations. And rather than framing it as the barrier existing in the student, I have found it very empowering framing it as where does the barrier exist in the design? Because that's the piece that empowers me to say, hey, I can't change any of my students, but I can certainly go back and look at my design and go from there.
How did you realize that? I'm asking that because I remember in my teacher training long ago, things that I went through in the classroom learning how to teach. At first it was Spanish for me, that I needed to aim my lesson, my content, my level at a certain, I don't know, I might say something like the B student, that I could advance for the A student, the naturally talented or experienced A students. I might have to do something extra for the C's or the D's. Well, what do you do for those who are really struggling? I mean, I just remember wrestling with that as a teacher, saying, how do I make sure that everybody succeeds but I've got 20 or 30 people in the room. That's
Mm.
hard.
Exactly. And it is hard. And I think that when we design from that concept of Katie Novak would refer to it as the buffet versus the individual meal. I'm
Okay.
having a dinner party, and at my dinner party, my friend's coming who's vegan. I have another friend who's diabetic. I have another friend who's doing paleo. And now I'm thinking, I need to make everybody their own meal. And I'm overwhelmed, and I no longer want to host a party.
Wow.
She reframes it as, let's have a buffet. Here's a number of options, and we're going to let people choose for themselves. Not me as the educator or the designer picking for them, but by giving learner agency, where my guest can come to the buffet and pick and choose the things that work for them. Now, again, I'm the designer of the buffet. I'm still the one choosing what's going out, but I'm really designing experiences even at a buffet, just like I do in my classroom. And so as a guest at a party, when do you feel most welcomed, most belonging, most part of a community? When you have to eat the meal that was put aside for you, or when you get to have that same shared experience where you're all building what works for you? Which goes back to your original question. Where did I come up with this? I have no new ideas. I stand on the backs of giants. I am simply lifted up by all these other amazing people who are out there doing the work.
That's so true, I think, for all of us when we stop and think about it. These ideas didn't just emerge from my own brain. I'm so brilliant. No, they come from interactions with other people. So are there a couple of experiences you've had that taught you why that one size fits all doesn't work and why universal design matters?
Definitely. And I have them from both the perspective of being a learner and from the side of being a developer and a facilitator. I love the fact that my world right now, still I have a foot in both, because I think being able to hold on to what it feels like to be in the learner's shoes is critical to being able to remember, well, where were the barriers for me in this situation? So as a learner, I'm one of those people who is very gestalt. I need to see the big picture. I need to know how all the pieces are going to fit together. And sometimes you're in a course that's very linear and everything follows and it fits. And I really don't need any extra scaffolds or supports to make sense of it. But I was in a course and it was such a simple thing that the facilitators did. But we got a one-page handout, and every time they taught us something new. And we probably got 6 concepts every time we were together. They put them up on a giant wall. They put them up on a wall. And then we added them to this one handout, just one handout. Now, I am a copious note taker. I will try to capture most of the words that are said. But for me, that can be very challenging later when I need to go back and figure out, well, where did this idea fit with this other idea?
Yeah.
And by having this one page, here's all the concepts that we've learned in this course. They're on one page for you. You can see where they fit. You can see how they're categorized together. I've kept that one page and referenced it over and over again when I'm designing professional learning experiences for people. It is that piece, and it ties directly back to UDL. There's a UDL consideration around like highlighting critical relationships. That's exactly what that one piece of paper did. It highlighted how all these pieces fit together. I had a similar situation, but in the opposite way. So, like most of us who've been through doctoral programs, there were plenty of statistics courses. And yes, let's talk about MANOVAs and let's talk about Spearmans and correlations and chi-squares. And I knew them in isolation, but I needed that same type of one page. Here's all of the different statistical procedures. How do they work together? Why would I pick this one over that one? Rather than me flipping through my binder of reading about the Spearman, well, that one doesn't apply, and reading about the next one. And I realized I need a decision tree. And then I created that for myself. But it was one of those things where I thought, wow, this would have been something that wouldn't have benefited just me. I'm sure it would have benefited multiple people. And I think that's the piece when we think about design, is that something that might be necessary for some usually ends up being good for everybody.
So I just had this thought. I have too many examples in my head, but I just had this thought of when we're working on just accessibility, right? Accessibility for online media, like say for videos or other things, that it used to be a special accommodation for us to put the transcript or closed captions on a video. Over the last few years, what has happened that people turn on the closed captions on their TV shows, on their Netflix, or on whatever. It actually turns out that having that written word on the screen is helpful for everybody, not just for those who have auditory, differences, or visual preferences, or those things that we talk about as preferences or as learning styles. There are certain things we do that are much more helpful to everyone, not just those with what we used to call special needs,
And that is such a great example. And universal design for learning comes from universal design from the world of architecture. So even things, if you look in your house at your doorknobs, or light switches, when they switch to more of like a rocker type of switch, things that were created, designed with a group in mind of this might be somebody who has a hard time with the narrow little light switch, but everybody loved the rocker switch, or a curb cut, where the curb cut's necessary for somebody who uses a wheelchair for mobility, but at the same time, a curb cut is great for a teacher with a rolling cart or a parent with a stroller. So
what started out as an accommodation became standard or just expected because it was just helpful to everybody. That makes it, I guess that's where the universal word comes, right? It's universally helpful. That's great. I'm also thinking of in graduate school, I had a teacher. Okay, it was Dr. Jill Stam at Arizona State. We'll name her. I think it was my favorite class of my entire program. It was a learning theories class. And every week, 2 or 3 of us were assigned to present kind of an icebreaker for the class in the style of whatever that learning theory was, whatever we were studying at the time. And I don't necessarily remember every single thing that we did each week. But what I remember is that activity let every person build, create, present, teach something in the way that they preferred it. I just remember that was like my favorite part of every single quote unquote lecture, every single class, was that you got to see different people's perspectives and what they thought was helpful or useful in the classroom for them. And it made the learning so much deeper for me, as you were mentioning, having the one-page gestalt of everything. that actually ended up being the syllabus plus the handouts that we each had to create every class, because we created them for our classmates. So I ended up with this collection of ideas for engaging students and, deepening learning that I don't think I could have had ever if Dr. Stam had stood up in front with a PowerPoint and just presented it. It became universally better for us. So this is great.
And I love that example because, again, one of the big pieces with universal design for learning is designing options for students with students, really, designing options with students on, how to engage with the material, what type of information are you taking in, how are you demonstrating what you know? And when students have those options to pick, when there's choice involved, it's more relevant, it's more meaningful. Like you said, you're remembering it today. And
it's been a lot of years. It's been a lot of years, Michelle. And I still remember her name.
Right. And I think that's so relevant too, that when we think about, if you ask people, what was a teacher or a lesson that you still remember to this day? There's always something where it hooked them in. There's that engaging piece. And, that part is so relevant. And it goes back to the question that you were asking me, is versus a one size fits all, right? She could have created a slide deck with, here's all the different learning theories, but somebody would have been left out. Yep. It would have been somebody that a slide deck.
Probably most of us.
Well, right. And especially because there's that piece of when you experience something versus just when you hear about something.
Yeah.
Read about something.
Yeah.
That really helps it to stick.
Yeah. So, Michelle, you've been helping people learn to use principles of universal design now for a while, right? What kinds of challenges do you find when you're working with faculty about, hey, I'm trying, I don't know, nothing's working? And, how do you handle the challenges that people have when they come and work with you?
I think one of the key things right off the bat is being very transparent about, I'm not the world's best designer. I know the principles, but the times that I'm successful is when I have gotten to collaborate with other people. Rising tide lifts all ships. The idea of okay, who can I sit down with and think through this with? That sometimes has been remarkably helpful. In the past, some of the language with UDL, which has changed very recently, when UDL shifted from the 2.2 guidelines to 3.0, is that they used to use the term checkpoints. And I'm one of those type of people that I like to get things done and I like a list. And I had the mindset that UDL was a checklist. And if I did so many, I was doing UDL. And I have found that I was not alone in that. And when UDL, the guidelines were revised up to 3.0, the chairs for that project, Dr. Jenna Gravel and Nicole Tucker-Smith, and I love that they did this, they reached out internationally and said, hey, what is your feedback? Where are we with the guidelines? And it kept coming back with this thing about a checklist. And people were losing that UDL is a lens for design. It's a mindset and a way of thinking about your design, not a list of steps that you have to check off. And so I think for me, when I'm working with somebody, being able to say, hey, listen, we're going to keep this small. We're going to keep it in an iterative cycle, because what I find when I talk to people is that they're feeling overwhelmed. I already have a lot of things on my plate. I have a number of responsibilities. Have I been teaching wrong? And I've
That
had
hits a little bit.
people like, am I a bad teacher?
Mm.
And it's like, you know what? I'm not perfect. I can show you tons of lessons where I was like, oh, that could have been a lot better.
Yeah.
But that piece of being able to say, all right, let's talk about what's going on right now. Let's find one challenge that you can identify. And matter of fact, I'll go back, not my idea. I learned this from Dr. Jenna Gravel, but matter of fact, I shared for the resources, Dr. Jennifer Pusateri, who does a lot of work with UDL and higher ed, uses a troubleshooting analysis to keep it really simple, because that's what people need. If people feel like there's 32 different things I need to think about, well, that's too much.
Mm.
So
Can't keep that in your head.
Exactly. So we're going to take it down to what's a challenge? Oh, you're finding that students on discussion boards aren't really communicating with one another. You really want to build more discussion. All right. So let's take that one small piece. Now let's see what's going on in the design. Is there something? Could we reframe the questions? And so we're really taking something that I feel like in the past people thought doing UDL, like in quotes, was this overwhelming process and it was going to be hard, and really bringing it back to more of this problem of practice protocol of, all right, what's a challenge I'm seeing? What's the barrier in the design? So again, I'm empowered, something I can have control over. Now, what can I do? What's a small shift I can make? Maybe it's I change some of my prompts. Maybe I give some options for prompts. Again, it doesn't have to be a big, significant change, but you can try something small, see where it goes. And again, we're keeping in that fast iterative cycle. And I think the other piece of that is then we're asking students, what's working in this for you? Because I know even in my own experience as a learner, get a student satisfaction, we get the student feedback survey at the end.
Yeah.
And now I've moved on and I'm in another class and I don't know if any of my feedback was taken seriously or not.
I have no idea.
I would much rather ask for feedback early on. What's working? What's not working? And then even if I can't make those changes, maybe during this current course, I can certainly point them out in the next one. Hey, we're trying something new this time. Let me know how this works for you.
Yeah. That same class I was talking about, at the end of every session, we had like a 60-second paper, which was essentially, hey, what was one big thing you learned and what's something we could do, question you still have for next time. So it ended up being this iterative process inside of the class or the class sessions. This was an in-person class, but it was then the next week or the next time that we met, like the most common things that she read from this little, single, like index card from each of the students was something she could address and say, okay, how would we do this? And engage with us. And how do we make this better? And I've ended up doing that in my online classes as well, just with an ungraded end of the lesson sort of a thing, just asking what worked, what didn't, what questions do you have that we can improve on? And like you're saying, that's so different from 4 months later, I have to fill out this survey that goes to who knows where. And I never know if my feedback was heard or if anything changed at all. It's just a very different way of thinking. It's not checklist thinking. It's more people-centered, I guess. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think too, the benefits are for both sides.
Yeah.
The benefit for me as a learner is that, wow, I had a need and boom, it's getting addressed like next week, which is fabulous. And even sometimes maybe there's something that actually can't change. But even to hear it said, hey, I'm hearing that you need this. I'm looking into it. sometimes just being heard can have an impact. The other piece, though, as the facilitator, the designer, is that now that I'm getting that feedback, boom, I can do something with it. If I get the feedback at the end of the course and somebody says, I wished we'd had XYZ, I also can't talk to them and find out, well, I don't know what you meant by that. What did you need? They're gone.
They're gone. It was
They're
anonymous.
gone.
You have no idea. Yeah.
And so having these, and again, like you framed it, doesn't have to be a ton of questions. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but keeping it short, keeping it simple. And I think too that when it's something that like a class does, really quickly, you're going to notice if a number of people are having the same challenge. Because as I'm trying to prioritize, and again, it goes back to that sense of overwhelm. And I have felt that sense of overwhelm as a teacher. Oh my gosh, there's 30 things wrong with my design.
Yeah.
Where do I start? So the first thing is we're going to take a breath. We're going to offer ourselves grace.
Mm-hmm.
I think grace is one of my favorite words. And then we're going to figure out what's the change that I could do now? What's one thing I can change? And Thomas Tobin calls this the +1 approach. That what's the one thing that I could do that would remove a barrier? And then I do that one thing and we see how it works. And then I go for the next one. And again, we're in those iterative cycles where I'm not having to wait to the end of the course and then find out, oh, there are 30 things I should have changed.
Yeah.
And then I just feel even more overwhelmed. So I find it empowering as a designer. And I've heard other people say, well, it sounds like a lot more work. You want me to give more options. You want me to give them a video and you want me to give them something else to read. And you want me to give them options for assignments. And the reality, though, is that, yes, in the beginning, it might take a little bit to come up with those ideas. But in the long term, it's not really more work. It's just different work. And I start thinking about, because instead of trying to retrofit something, I'm just putting the effort in on the front end, as opposed to coming around at the back, like, oh, now I got a dozen things to fix.
I find that's a designer mindset. Can I put the work in up front so that later I have to work less hard?
Right. Well, and again, I don't, sometimes people say like, well, the start of a semester is really hard. There's so much going on. Okay. Again, +1. Let's take the one thing.
Yeah.
Well, what would make a really big difference for somebody right now?
Thank you for joining us for this first part of our conversation with Michelle Patterson. In this episode, we explored the foundations of universal design for learning and thinking beyond the average learner. We talked about identifying barriers in design and making small, meaningful improvements through an iterative process. And join us next time as we dig deeper into overcoming the overwhelm that we feel in trying to implement universal design principles, and learn how small design shifts that might be supported by systems and even AI tools, how that can expand access and engagement for all learners, regardless of capability. So thank you for listening. And if this conversation sparked some ideas for your team, please share the episode with your friends and join us at engagedbydesign.com for more resources to accelerate your learning. That's what we're here for.